guess we're ready. Well, thank you all for being here today, and I think after that rousing speech by Catherine Skinner, I'm revved up. I don't know about you guys, but I am revved up for web archiving. So today, I wanted to talk to you about, over the course of the 20th century and late 20th century and into the 21st century, there's an increasing amount of information and data that's been created digitally. And it's an undeniable fact that most of our future documents are going to be digital. That's just it. Unfortunately for us, though, electronic formats become obsolete sometimes almost as fast as they're created. So this is a big problem. So as I got to thinking about this over the last few months, since I wasn't here in the summer, I started thinking about it. And so I asked some questions about how much this cost and that sort of thing. And to create and present ILEADU and ILEADU USA, excuse me, this program over the last 4 years, the Illinois State Library and IMLS have spent approximately $1.6 million on this. So let's just think about that a moment. $1.6 million. And that's not including all of the participants' time, the instructors' time, the keynote speakers' time. So let's let that sink in a moment. That's a lot of money and a lot of time. So, think about the documentation that you have created just for your project right now, this year. Not to mention all the ones that have been previously created, but just this year. You've got meeting notes, you've got audio files, you might have video files. Joe's got video files. You've got outlines, you've got discussions, you've got emails. You may have web presence. You've got all kinds of electronic online information. And even if some of it is on paper, I'm going to guess and say that all of it is certainly in an electronic format as well. So, now let's imagine this scenario. And I think this is not functioning today. So, 10 years from today, you decide to do a retrospective for your library or your community about your project, your ILEADU project. And this is what happens. Can't open the file. Okay, well, this is my reaction to that. So today we're going to talk about, it might require some digital forensics at this point. Now you can see this is an Adobe file that I just got an image for, but today there's probably some digital forensics that we could get to actually open this file and access this information. But who knows in 2024 if we really could. So I'd like to talk today about some ways that we can actually prevent this from happening, how you can actually try to preserve your documents, your documentation. So how long do digital files last? Anybody have a guess on that? Well, not as long as you might think. Now, Jeff Rothenberg is being only slightly facetious here. But nevertheless, they don't last forever. And that is the problem. People assume that they do. So in order to understand what we're talking about here, I just want one little slide on some background, a little definition here of digital information. So when we talk about that, what we're really talking about are the little bits and bytes, the little bits behind this photo here, this little image. So this is the machine-readable information, and that's what we're talking about preserving. Not particularly that image there, but the machine-readable information that makes that possible. Because that doesn't really exist. Those are the things that exist. So these are just this is the binary notation that defines the language that computers understand. Binary just means two, so the binary state of these bits is either on or off. That's it. They have two states they can be in. So that's why 1 and 0. Okay, so I'm sure that you're all relatively familiar with that, so we'll move on. Now, to paraphrase the Rolling Stones, time is not on our side here in this problem. And I have a little cautionary tale that illustrates why this is so. Some of you may have heard of the Domesday Project. In 1085, William the Conqueror commissioned this project because basically he wanted to know how much tax money he was going to derive from all the people that he governed. So this was done in ink on parchment. It still exists, 1,000 years later, it still exists. Well, here's what happened. To celebrate the 1,000-year anniversary of this wonderful, amazing book, the BBC decided that they were going to, they spent £2.5 million, and that's a lot of money in American dollars. That's probably twice that much at this point. I'm not sure what the conversion rate is these days, but that's a lot of money. And considering it was 1984, it's probably even more now. But more than 1 million people in England submitted letters and photographs and videos, documentation of their lives for this project. More than 1 million people. Well, they did this in a format called LV-ROM, laser video disc. That format was quickly superseded. And so once the technology was no longer supported, boop, no machinery to read it. There was one machine, one malfunctioning machine at the BBC called Acorn that could read this, but at the time it was not functional. So 15 years after this project was done, it was completely inaccessible. That's not very long, is it? That's from here back to the year 2000. Think of how fast that time has gone. It's gone in a blink of an eye. 2024 could be here just that quickly. So it took a team from the University of Leeds and the University of Michigan to actually work on this for several years, and now it is accessible again. But it's a cautionary tale, and it proves what our friend Richard Pierce Moses at the Arizona State Library says. We can sure keep those zeros and ones alive forever, but can we make sense of them? Can we actually read them again? Maybe, maybe not. So when we talk about protecting our digital assets, in order to combat that specter, and I know it's kind of dramatic to say, oh, the digital dark ages, but it really is. It could happen. There could be this gap, as Catherine said this morning, this huge gap, this black hole in our culture because we don't have things that we should have been documenting. So in order to protect our digital assets, we have to address these two things. We have to make sure that we are preserving the data itself and that we are preserving the readability and comprehensibility of the files. So one thing I want to stress is that every decision you make about creating your digital files is interrelated. It's all the same story. It's all the same thing. You have to think about this life cycle here, preservation and maintenance and archiving, access, selection. All of these things are all part of how to protect your digital assets. So we have to be thinking about that all the time. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. I worry about this sort of thing. So let me just check, make sure I said everything I needed to say here. All right, so in terms of maintaining the readability and comprehensibility of the data, this means that we have to make sure that we have software and hardware that will read these. Because like manufacturers will tell you that CDs will last for 50 years, but hey, in 50 years, are we going to have a machine that can read a CD? And where might that machine be? Maybe there'll be one in the library, maybe not. Maybe you might have one at home, but maybe you won't. So we have to be thinking about this all the time. And here's some reasons why. Digital information is subject to all kinds of threats. There's human intervention. How easy is it to go in and change a digital image? Just like that. Photoshop, you can use the GNU image manipulation program, any sort of photo manipulation, image manipulation software can change any image. Files can get corrupted. Bit rot can occur. All of these things, computers can fail. files can be lost, for one thing. Metadata. There might not be any metadata associated with it, or it might get misplaced. Maybe there is a record somewhere, but it's not attached to the file in some way, which I'm going to talk about later, how to actually do that. Of course, natural disasters. You know, water disasters are the most common type of disasters in most institutions. File format obsolescence. This is one of the big things that we have to worry about. Now, if we choose good file formats, which is another thing I'm going to talk about, we don't have as much worry there, even though one day they will probably be obsolete. And then we have storage media obsolescence. I just mentioned the CDs. CDs and DVDs will probably go away. So we have to think about the storage media that we have. So, don't let any of this paralyze you. I want to make sure that you know that you don't have to be afraid, because the Magic 8 Ball says you do not have to be an expert in order to start thinking about and practicing good digital preservation techniques, curating your digital materials. So let's talk about how can we avoid some of these problems. Well, first of all, we need to think about preservation file formats. The Library of Congress has this wonderful document that talks about the sustainability of digital file formats. And these are the different factors that they say that we should be looking at. So when we choose a preservation file format. So first of all is disclosure. And this refers to the degree to which complete specifications and tools for validating the technical integrity exist, and that they're accessible to those of us who are creating and sustaining digital content. We don't want anything that's hidden. Preservation of content in a digital format over the long term is not feasible without understanding how this information is represented, or how it's actually encoded in those little bits and bytes in the digital file. So this has to be open. And then adoption. This means we have to look at our file format. Is it widely used? Is it widely adopted? File formats that are used by many people that are really common, like, you know, Acrobat, Adobe PDF, or PDF-A. These are widely adopted things. This is good because the more people that use them, the more support there will be for this file format to last. So we want to make sure that we think about that. Transparency refers to the degree with which the digital representation is open to direct analysis. So if we can use basic tools, including human readability, I mean just including opening it and looking at the file, and using things like a text editor. Digital formats in which this underlying information is represented very simply and directly is going to be easier to migrate to new file formats. And that's something that we also need to consider. They should be self-documenting. These kind of files are much easier to maintain and sustain over the long term, and they are less vulnerable to catastrophes than data objects that are stored separately from all the metadata that's needed to render them. And that's why we want to talk about putting metadata, having the metadata. I mean, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. External dependencies refers to the degree that your file relies on particular hardware or operating system to actually be usable or accessible. Some forms of interactive digital content. This can be a problem because they might not be tied to a particular physical media. They're designed for use with a specific hardware. So that can be a big problem for that. And also, Andrew mentioned something about databases. Those are really difficult to preserve. Any sort of scientific data sets, for example, this is another thing that are built from things like sensor data These are the kind of things that might be totally useless without that software for analysis and visualization of that data. So this is that kind of software too is going to be kind of difficult to sustain, even if the source code is available. So these are all things we have to think about. Now the impact of patents. This is, patents may inhibit the ability of archival institutions to sustain content in a particular format. That's the bottom line there. And then we have our technical protection mechanisms. That's lovely. Actually, to preserve digital content and provide service to users and our designated communities in the years in the future, we have to be able to replicate that content. We have to replicate it on new media. We have to be able to migrate it and normalize that data. And we have to do this in the face of changing technology. And we have to disseminate it to users. And we have to disseminate it to our users at a resolution that's consistent with things like network bandwidth. So the content for which a trusted repository takes long-term responsibility really should not be protected by any sort of technical mechanisms like encryption. We don't want to have encrypted files. This is not a good thing for us. And we need to make it, we need to make our files available, open to the future users of them. They need to be accessible. The digital content needs to be accessible. So let's talk about some preservation file formats. You know, if you start off right, then you have less worries down the road. So for text, PDF and PDF-A actually are very good formats, and PDF-A is becoming a more commonly used format. I've been recommending this as I've done more research on it myself, because it's one of the things that it does is it actually preserves the embedded fonts in your document, which regular PDF might not. If you've ever seen a PDF that's been OCR'd, you can see there's some things that are not true to the original item. So this is why I think PDF-A is the way to go for text documents. Still images, the gold standard is still the TIFF, the tagged image file format, uncompressed, always. For spreadsheets, we have CSV and we have open document format. CSV, wait a minute, just having a...
Comma separated value.
Thank you. Comma separated values, thank you, Andrew. For audio, we want to have, well, you know, I really should talk about some other formats here too. I have more notes here. I'm trying not to look at my notes as much. I'm trying to pay attention to the screen. But, you know, XML, extensible markup language documents also. This is a standard format for structured documents. This is another great way that we can, for text documents. HTML, that's another way that we can actually preserve. Although I really still think that PDF-A is probably our best bet. But these are just some alternate formats that are easier, that can be used. We can also do plain text. Simple plain text is just plain text. Although that's not going to preserve the look and feel of anything, any fonts or any special characters or any of that sort of thing that we might want to preserve. So we have to think about that. But it is open source and it's universally adopted. So it's not proprietary. It doesn't belong to anybody. Open document format for spreadsheets. This is an XML-based file format that's used for spreadsheets and charts and presentations and that sort of thing. It's an open format that was developed by Sun Microsystems, and it is available. It's been published as an ISO standard. So that's a good thing. It's a standard format now. All right. So I mentioned the TIFF. Now, there's other things, other ways that we can save still images other than TIFF. JPEG 2000 is not as highly compressed as a JPEG. So if you have to save something as a JPEG, it's probably better to save it as a JPEG 2000 with a low amount of compression rather than, if you can't save it as a TIFF. I mean, sometimes cameras and digital cameras and phone cameras, things like that, do not take raw images or TIFF images. They'll take JPEG, but they'll be highly compressed JPEG images. So unfortunately, all right. Let's talk about audio a little bit. So we have broadcast wave format, and then we have wave format. Broadcast wave format is really a format of wave. They are related. But the broadcast wave format, it takes the existing wave file structure and adds additional metadata support, which is a good thing. So that's why it's kind of recommended. But it's not really very widely adopted yet. I think wave format is more widely adopted, but it's still being recommended as kind of perhaps the gold standard, but I don't know that a lot of institutions can support that BWF file yet. For videos, of course, you're probably familiar with these, MPEG-4, and then there's Motion JPEG 2000. This is another video format as well. But I think MPEG-4 is probably the best way to go at this point. Andrew, do you have any thought about that yourself?
MPEG-4. That's what I'm.
Because I think that's what we've been recommending for the Illinois Digital Archives for years, is MPEG-4. So. All right, now that we've sorted out how we're actually going to create our files, which is the hardest part, how are we going to store them? Well, I think this is kind of interesting. Our storage strategy is very important because, as I said before, it's inherently unreliable. It's unstable. These things are not, they're not, you'd be surprised how many times I have students that will say to me, well, okay, so I have my files, they're all digital. Yay, they're all preserved. Well, no, they're not. And then I have to explain to them why. But, it's very interesting that people don't really think about this too much. But let's take a little trip down memory lane. I bet most of you remember some of these formats. I remember when we got these, the zip drive. Woohoo! Boy, you could get a lot of information on that. That was like, wow! Wow! And how much could you get on a zip drive? Andrew, do you remember?
100 megs.
100 megabytes. I think this little tiny USB that I have right here has 8 gigabytes of information available that I can store on there. So, but back in the early 2000s, this was a revolution. But you know what? This went out of date. This was obsolete within just a couple of years. They stopped putting the zip drives into the new computer. When I worked at the state library, I remember there were new computers being brought in, and there were no zip drives. And I saw the handwriting on the wall. I put mine right into my zip drive, and I took it all off and put it on my machine again, waiting for the next thing to happen, the next storage format. So I don't know, these, you can see that they're not tremendously long-lived, even though they seem like they might be. But CDs are probably the next thing that are going to go, I think.
CDs before DVDs?
Maybe both at the same time. I think one of the things that I like to note to people is that, I don't know, am I going to say something about that later? I probably am, but I can reiterate. DVDs will hold a whole heck of a lot of megabytes. They are really amazing for like audio and video files that are so huge. But here's the problem. DVDs have different standards for burning.
Right.
So if you burn a DVD on one machine, you may or may not be able to read it on another machine. Whereas CDs have one standard. So if you put a CD on any computer, you can read it on any other computer. That's the difference, and that's when people talk to me, and like right now I'm reading digital imaging grants proposals, and when people mention putting things on DVD, that's my first thought, is that, okay, I always recommend multiple ways of storing things anyway, but I just don't think that CDs and DVDs they're going to probably be not as long-lived as people had hoped. It's funny how the technology just keeps moving and moving and moving. It's like light speed. So pretty soon I'm just not going to have any videos or DVDs or anything at my house. It's just going to be in the cloud. I'm just going to go on and Netflix everything, I guess that will make it nice and easy to move, maybe. Although my book collection will still have to be moved. But, this is the kind of thing that this worries me too, that people have stuff. I have things on CDs, and I have begun a program of taking them off of the CDs, and I have external hard drives and, that kind of stuff to store things on. But the sad fact here is that the more complex and technological the storage media, the shorter the life expectancy of the media. And you can see, I got this from an article that by Stephen Fulia a few years ago, and I contacted him once and asked him about, in the middle here, it says the whale. I don't know if you can see that. And I said, does this refer to Moby Dick? And he said, yes, it does. Because that was, and that's sort of the, the nadir, or the downhill slide of, of paper. Because that was during the Industrial Revolution when paper began to be less archival with high rag content and less, and have more wood pulp content, and so it became a less archival medium, truthfully. So, but you can see that, so we can store a lot of things on our technology now, but, how long is that going to last? I don't know. It's scary to me how fast these things are going away. Okay, so what are some best practices that we can do in light of this, that, we know that things are going to be obsolete at some point. So first of all, we need to keep at least 2 copies of everything. That LOCKS program, lots of copies, keep stuff safe. Can't recommend that kind of thought process highly enough for all of you. Keep at least 2 copies on separate storage media. So for instance, I have things in my collection. Not only do I have CDs, but I have flash drives. I have some cloud storage. I have an external hard drive that I back things up on periodically, and that is not plugged in all the time to my computer because I don't want it on. I don't want it running. It's just there, and like once a month I plug it in, delete some files, back up everything, put it on there. It's done. So, and I'm thinking right now about getting a second one because it's several years old, and even though I don't use it a lot, I want to back up. I want something else, just in case. I'm just too nervous about it. So I also have some flash drives that I don't access very often. I just put certain things that I'm working on, especially files like when I'm developing classes and things, I'm writing lectures, and I want to make sure that they're backed up every day, rather than, because I had an unfortunate experience with this. I wasn't backing up my files, and my computer went one day, and that was a big, and I had lectures that I had worked weeks on. Gone. So I learned my lesson really fast. Also, store copies in different locations, in a different building even, different locations in your institution, but also in different locations, maybe in another city, at a sister institution, exchange files, here's our hard drive, we'll keep your hard drive and your extra hard drive or whatever. Always label your media so you know what's there, what you have. And create new archives archival media copies every 5 years. You know, CDs really are, in general, they're fairly reliable. But now I remember at the State Library, we had some CDs that possibly could have been a bad batch, but that had failed within 5 years. Fortunately, we had copies, we had backup copies. But we didn't always, we had one copy that was on aluminum, the silver CDs, and we had one that was on the gold CDs, and not gold color, they actually have a gold layer. And that is, if you're going to store things on CD, that's probably the thing that you should do, is spring for the extra money for that, because the gold will not corrode as quickly as the aluminum layer in the silver CDs. That's the bottom line there. We also need to have some best practices for describing our files. This is the metadata component. We need to give them descriptive names and dates. Where was the image taken? Or, you know, if it was images. If there are people in the image, who are these people? First and last names. The activity or the event that it describes. And this is true for things like text documents as well. Keep a file inventory, whether that is something, if you keep it, you can keep a spreadsheet if you want, or a database, whatever. But I think that, just going to check my notes here real quick. Okay. So, you know what? Most files have metadata already. Can you believe that? They do. They already have some metadata embedded in the file header. So, let's take a look at how we can access this and how we can fix this problem. Now, this is an image of my lovely nieces and nephews. Some of them, not all of them. We had a little painting party at our house. We got a new house and we had to do some painting, so they all came to help out. Wasn't that nice? And they did a great job. But, so you can see my file names there. They're not very descriptive, are they? That's just how they came out of the camera. Now, I'm not saying that you should go in and change every one of these file names to, you know, be something, but if we do a right click on that file and we click on the properties here, here's what comes up. Now, we can put metadata into the file header. And if we have to migrate this to another file format, this metadata should come with it. Now, I will caution you about storing things in the cloud on some services like Flickr and some other services. If you are storing images there, they tend to strip off most of the metadata. So if you have files that have important metadata, you might want to keep an extra copy of that file somewhere else, not in Flickr. But you can see here that now I have this great metadata that tells me what the occasion was, where the picture was taken, and all the names of these people that were in this picture. I didn't say here that they are cousins, which I should for family genealogy purposes. But again, this is the kind of metadata that I want you to be thinking about for your files. So I've actually started doing this for my personal archive. I just recently, for my students, I had them do an assignment that was about their personal archive of materials. And I said, you know, I gave them a checklist, and I said, I want you to look at this, and I want you to think about your personal kind of digital files that you have. And I'd like you all to think about this too. What kind of files do you have, and where are they? You've probably got email, you've probably got photographs, you've got text, you've got audio and video, you've got all kinds of things out there. And yet, can you do a search and find something, you know? How well documented are your materials? Just your personal materials, not just your ILEADU materials. So I've been doing a systematic, every so often I'll pull out some more files and just do this to them. I'm hoping that someday somebody will appreciate it. Because here's the thing. if these files are still accessible in 20 years, which I hope they will be, but if they are, and there's no metadata, they are equivalent, photographs especially, are equivalent to that big box of photographs in your mom's attic that nobody knows who they are. And you don't want that to happen to your ILEADU materials especially. You know, we probably have some legal reasons that we need to be preserving that stuff, I'm thinking. And historical reasons, you know, collaborative reasons why we might want to have that stored. So, anyway, but this is so simple to do. And you can do this with just any file. So I highly recommend, this is the kind of thing that we should be doing. Well, I think by now you know why we should care about this. And it's because the data longevity really does depend on the storage medium. Not just the storage medium, but the ability to access and decipher the information that's on that storage medium. So, you know, in a little over 100 years, we've gone from these paper files of this, you know, somebody I probably work with at the state library,
Yeah. Still does.
yeah, probably still works there, wearing the same kind of filing things in a little you know, open, you know, vertical file, to all these different kinds of tools that we have in our arsenal now, the kind of digital curation tools that we actually have out there. So I want you to actively think about ways to preserve your files and actively think about how you can, as you're creating these files, don't let them build up over time. You know, don't let the, you know, there's, oh, we've got a wad of 100 files now. Oh, who's got time to go back in and do this? You know, it's overwhelming if you don't just think about it and do it right now. So, we want to avoid ending up here in a few years. And this is that, again, as Catherine said this morning, that gaping hole, that black hole in our culture. You know, I'm as concerned as Catherine is about this, that we are going to be, you know, and I know that over the centuries, there have been, you know, we probably only have this much of what people have created anyway. But I think, you know, at this point in time, with everything being electronic, that we are really in grave danger of losing some valuable things that document our culture, the daily life of people. You know, for instance, when I think about, you know, we look at the Illinois Digital Archives, and I see these local history projects, and the people have letters, and they have diaries, and they have photographs. They have all these wonderful things that document the daily life of regular people. And that's how we learn about our history. That's how people do research on what people were thinking at the time, you know, and what was happening at the time. It's the same way with the ILEADU things. You know, if we don't document them, if we don't create this metadata, if we aren't careful with this, we could have a big hole there, and we won't have any record of these materials. So I just am very concerned about this, and I just can't think, I can't stress it enough. This is, again, something that I worry about at night. I don't wake up in the night, but I do sit around and worry. So, as all good presenters do, I have my due credit. But I want to thank you all for coming today. I think probably I'm preaching to the choir in many respects here. But does anybody have any questions or anything you'd like to talk about in terms of, you know, the kind of things that you want to do with your files?
So when I get my documents deposited in EDI, in the electronic, Joe, you want me to sit up there?
I gotcha.
All right, man. Because nothing I'd rather be than on camera. That's
Yeah.
when I get my documents deposited in that, which is the state repository of government documents, I go once a week. When they get deposited, I create an MD5 string that is a string that is basically a long 24-character description of that file.
Checksum?
It's a checksum description of it. I take the whatever is deposited and turn it into a PDFA or a TIFF file using GhostScript, and then I store that in a separate database. And once a year, I'm going through an inventory and checking to make sure that MD5, I recompute the MD5, make sure it's the same file, that nothing's changed, because we have a legal obligation to keep that deposited document
Right.
exactly as that deposited document is. And I also copy it from one location to another just to refresh the bits on it. So my point is, it's a big, expensive process to do,
It is.
particularly at PDFA conversion, which 86% of the documents that we get deposited are PDFable. They're either born PDFs or I take docs and turn them into PDFs.
Right.
It's a long, extensive process, CPU-wise, I mean, clock cycle time-wise, and frequently it requires my intervention. So it's an investment, I guess.
It is. It is an investment in the future. Even though it's expensive, it is an investment in the future. And I wonder if, I'm guessing that most of those things that are deposited don't have any, if we were to look at the file, you know, if we were to look at the properties, I bet you there's probably no metadata other than perhaps the date it was created and the computer that was created on, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking, I think with GhostScript, with versions of GhostScript, you can actually write into the header.
Can you
And
bulk do that?
Hmm?
Can you do that in bulk?
Well, I'm wondering if,
I mean, you know,
but
for certain
then I'm
things.
altering, okay, I guess.
But
this
yeah,
is-
then you're all, yeah, so then you have the problem of fidelity and authenticity.
Right, I'm
in the
altering
file.
that
So,
official legal
yeah.
document that's been deposited.
Yeah, yeah. In that case, you know, I think that you know, of course, I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on TV, but, you know, I think you hit on something very important that I didn't talk about, and that was you know, that we have to preserve the authenticity and fidelity of the documents because there are probably legal reasons, especially in Andrew's case, but probably in all of your cases, there's legal reasons why your institution would want those to be. And also because you want to make sure that your users understand that they are seeing the actual thing, the real thing, and not something that's been altered.
Do you think, Alyce, with the next round of IDA, with images deposited in our digital archives, content DM installation, do you think I should go through and write into the headers of those deposited JPEGs metadata? What's your opinion?
You know, that's not a bad idea.
I don't know how to automate that.
I'm not sure that there's a way to automate it. That's going to be the problem. But, you know, because you're not, the way that you can get around the fidelity, authenticity thing is because the institution still has a master version of it.
Mhm.
So if there's ever any question, the institution can pull out their master and say, you know, but it's not a bad idea, really.
So that alone, I'm now going to think about that from this discussion, so.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, it's probably not a bad idea. It's probably not a bad idea to talk to the grant recipients or anybody that's putting material into IDA about that, you know, about putting metadata into their, of course, that will just add more time onto. But again, they could put some minimal metadata on their master files. You
Sure.
know? I mean, and they really should, actually. I mean, I know that, you know, sometimes if you're doing 3,000 things in a project, that's, you know, that's a lot of time it's going to take to do that. But
I wonder if there's a way to get, I'm sorry, I don't mean this to just be a conversation between us, but I'm wondering if Content DM, if OCLC could be persuaded to, it's taking that image and reformatting. Well, hell, as long as it's reformatting it, why not create that header information from the metadata that people are putting in to begin with?
yes, hey, that's not bad.
I'll talk to Mr. Gardner about that.
That's perfect. That's a great idea, right there. Automate it from the beginning.
Right, where
Make it easy.
it's totally out of control of the person
Yeah,
doing it.
yeah.
wondered if there's any sort of connection between accessibility and preservation. I mean, we've got this whole kind of culture now of accessibility and being able to support multiple devices and all those kinds of things. And how does all of that play into preservation, or are they kept totally separate?
I think they're separate at this point, and I think that is probably going to be an issue at some point in the future. But I think if we have a master that is in an archival format, maybe it's not accessible, but we have one, then that's the most important thing that we have to guard. The other versions of it, the accessible versions of it, that's, you know what I'm saying? I don't know that it's really a huge issue as long as there's a master that's not being used, that's just put away, and we protect that. Because all the derivatives are just that, they're derivatives that can be made again. Is that a non-answer?
I had a quick question on preservation as well. If you were, I'm a photographer, so I take a lot of digital photographs now, but I have a lot of film as well. So of course, back in the day, I would actually get the film printed. So now I have, actual pictures, right? But now you've got like family photos or whatever from the past, and I've got a whole bunch of those. You scan them in, you've got your TIFF, you've got all your files, you've got your backup, and you've got this preservation. But what if you're starting from the point of the digital file, and there's no print of it? And I think a lot of people do this. They put them up on Flickr. They put, they share them on Facebook, but they're not actually taking time, money, effort to actually put them on photographic paper and actually have a photograph now. From a preservation point of view, would you suggest that you do that? That way you have it in the digital format,
Yeah.
but you actually have a physical, if it's something really rare, like it's a 5-generational picture in your family tree or something.
I think I probably would do that. I would probably print it out on good photographic paper.
Yeah,
Is there archival, I'm sorry to interrupt, is there archival paper you can run through an HP printer or something if it's digital?
Well, there's archival paper. I don't know if there's archival photo paper.
That's-
Yeah,
yeah.
photo,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good
But I mean, you
question.
could still take it to Walmart and get
Well, yeah, you can
a
still get
photograph
something
of
that
it,
would-
I mean, a physical
Right.
item.
But it's debatable how long something like that, is
Right.
like if it's a laser or inkjet or laser printer, how
Right.
long is that going to last? If it's
Right.
kept out of the light, perhaps it'll
Right,
last
if you put it in
longer,
archival
but-
folders or something like that,
Yeah.
would that preserve? I just always wonder about that, because now I'm so digitally orientated that I don't have a lot of the pictures,
Mhm. Well,
and I
it's
share them with my family and everything, but it's always just a shared thing. It's never a,
Mhm. Well, an interesting thing that I've seen in some digital projects is that they've actually created 35mm slides as well as digital images. So there's something physical.
yeah.
A
You
there,
know,
there is a
There's a
there.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good way to put it. And because they were so valuable that they wanted to make sure they understood the risks of the digital world. And
Well,
so,
when you look at how long paper has lasted versus
Mhm.
some of our digital content,
Well, one thing about slides too is that they don't require any technological intervention. They don't
Right,
require
you
any
can-
software or hardware. You just hold up to a light source and you can see what's there.
yeah,
It might not be very big, but you can see what's there.
right.
So that's something to think about too.
To kind of build off that, I had an experience with my 7-year-old, which would probably help you think of the future of that in general. We've had family pictures taken.
Sure.
They're on his disc. The disc is in with my wedding album.
Yeah.
They pulled my wedding album out the other day and Rick was flipping through it, looking at pictures of our wedding. And then they went, "What are these, Mommy?" It would have been much more beneficial for them if I'd have printed those images and put them in an album as well, because right then and there, they'd have had their hands on the past.
Yeah.
So that's where I think if the images are important enough, yes, you still take them and print them, even if it is just Walmart. And I think what I did then was I went and printed the images, and I have the disc stored in the folder with the images, so then, it's almost like thumbnails but larger.
Yeah.
But it's like, I thought, oh my gosh, here I am not giving my kids immediate access to their history.
Well, my dad was a photographer, and so basically, when he first started out, of course, it was slides, So I have like shoe boxes full of
Sure.
family photo slides,
Yeah.
okay, And I bought a particular scanner that would actually scan in the slides, and so now they're all digital, okay? But then I think my nephews will never really see them because they are slides other than the digital, and maybe they don't care.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just not, a big enough deal for that. But I just worry about that section of the world where we all switched to digital at some point, and now there's no physical for the actual
and I like
images.
the physical myself. I
Yeah.
like the physical photographs, so.
Yeah, I get that.
But in terms of documents and things, I'm okay with electronic documents.
Yeah,
and
oh, me
not
too,
having
yeah.
paper. Although, there, you could say the same thing about that, should we print off important things
Yeah.
just to be on the side? But I think that we might be a little,
Okay.
maybe that's being a little too worried about it, perhaps. But nevertheless.
Anyway,
still a
some
thought.
thoughts I had on that topic.
Yeah,
I
that's a
just.
good question, that's a good thought, Donna.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I interrupted your thought, Marcia. I had one other thought. I don't know if
Go ahead, sure.
So you have talked heavily about preservation and file type.
Mhm.
And you mentioned open access or making them, available for people to see. What suggestions do you have on that aspect? For example, our ILEADU project and all of the documents we've created currently live in Google Drive, which is not open for anyone else to use. We're making the pertinent documents we're creating for the project available on a web page, but what about all those other documents? How can we capture those and pull them together to make them a coherent collection that's open access and available?
That's a very good question.
You could turn them into PDFs.
But where?
There are several programs.
Where to make them accessible at.
Ah.
So then I have the PDFA. Where do I put the PDFA?
Well, me personally.
Is there a place for the ILEADU?
Sure, on the blog,
That's
but
what I was thinking, but can it support that much, like in documentation and
Sure.
stuff like that? And
Well,
I'm
what-
sorry, I interrupted your thought.
I was just gonna say, I would put them on a website, okay, fine. And of course, you're gonna have your Libris website, you could have a little about, here's the history of what we did and stuff, but what concerns me, and what we've always talked about, is the context of those things. So you've got document, well, what the hell? How do these things
Just how do they
relate as a
relate,
story?
yeah.
What's the overarching story, what's the narrative?
And that's where if you do it like a web page, that's
can
where
do
the
that.
story goes in the web page, right there, talking about the framework and the overarching, what does this mean? What's the context for these documents that exist, but why? So, and I find that too infrequently when I look at projects, like digital projects. I always have an assignment in my digitization class of a case study. My students have to go and look at a digital collection, something online, and talk about, how it was done, and did they do this well, and what did they, and they find it's hard to find documentation on many projects. Well, I think Catherine said this today too, that we don't document what we do. I know at the State Library, we often did not document many things for years,
I'm terrible at it.
Just simple things like how to do this, or where to find this particular item that nobody asks for except once every 5 years. It's just things like that, and so I think it's important. I really like the idea of creating context. Andrew and I talk about this all the time, about creating context for those historical materials. What's the story about these things? Without the story, they just are random documents that all have ILEADU in them. But what's it's like the interview questions. I would develop a web page with using those interview questions as a basis to guide you for developing a web page about the project. To say, here's what we were thinking. Here's what drove us to do this. here's the challenges that we face, here's how we overcame them, or not, as the case may be. I mean, you know, that kind of thing, and I think that's really important to document that kind of thing.
But on web pages, I worry about that because I've also created my own websites on certain things. So as long as I still exist as a human being and I'm paying for the URL, you know,
Yes,
true.
as
yes,
long as
your
I'm
personal-
willing
yeah.
to go to GoDaddy and get
Give
my
that.
URL renewed and renewed and renewed, it's fine. But I was just asked by my home church, we've got a whole bunch of German records from the 1850s that were translated into English. And at first my thought was, I will create a website and it'll be fabulous. But then I thought, well, who will maintain it once
Yes.
life moves on? And we don't know if websites will be the way we think of them now. So I'm actually thinking about publishing it in Lulu, you know, and doing a
Sure.
historical book that way, so.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, if you're going for the electronic way, I would save them as XML files,
Mhm.
Right,
because then you could preserve the context. I
Right.
mean, you could at least build a context of what the organization of that data is within the XML file.
Yeah.
But,
Mhm.
I mean, I realize it's a more techie way of doing it, but you're certainly preserving,
Yeah.
if a future computer person wanted to take those files and use them in another context, at least the
right.
context is available there. But that's why the semantic web is what we need.
Yeah.
Well,
The
go
dream.
forth and do something about that. We should just take care of it.
Maybe that's what we need to focus on next, the semantic web. Ooh, how exciting. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts or questions or anything you want to talk about? I think we're probably about out of time, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
well,
yeah, God, yes. Okay.
Thanks.
Alice. Oh, thank you, everyone.
I want to say CPL 52